Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, today I have a great privilege. A privilege to introduce to you the Right Honourable Peter Mandelson MP to YCTV. For the first time. Peter, thank you very much for taking the time out to pay this visit.
It's good to be here.
Why did you choose to come to YCTV out of all the invitations you get for visits?
Because I think it's the most exciting project I've heard about for a very long time.
Really?
Yes, I mean, introducing young people like you and all the others I've met to television, to broadcast technologies and all the skills that are involved. I think that's very good for you, and I think it's very good for television and the rest of us.
Now, I've spent most of my youth here. Where did you spend most of your youth? What did you get up to as a child?
I spent most of my youth in North London. What did I spend most of my time doing? Playing on the Heath, working very hard. Then I went into the Wolf Cubs and the Scouts. Then I left that for politics, became a young socialist, and well, the rest is history. Right. And here I am, being interviewed by you.
So was Labour always the side that you were on?
Yes.
You were born into it?
I was born into it. My family were very strong Labour, and my mother's father had been a politician, so that was a bit in the bloodstream. And where we lived, we were surrounded by, various politicians. When I was young, Harold Wilson lived round the corner, and me and my brother were friends with his boys, and so we just grew up with politicians and politics around us. But that's not why I went into politics. The reason I went into politics myself is because of what I care about, what I feel strongly about, what I want to do to change things. And the only way you can change things is through politics at the end of the day. And so that's why eventually I stood for election. Right,
so why then did you, if it was always politics for you, why did you start your career in television?
Because when I was in my 20s, late 20s, I was working in the House of Commons. I was working for a politician. And I enjoyed it, but it was a period in the early 1980s when the Labour Party was going through a very, very bad patch, shouting, taking lumps out of each other, talking to each other, ignoring everyone else, not bothering. It's as if they didn't care about being elected at that time. And I remember my mother saying to me, she said, do you really think that you shouldn't go off and perhaps get some other skills or think of some other career just in case, politics doesn't go wrong and doesn't go right for you, and and after all, you can't keep on being a researcher for people forever, so why don't you think of something else just to have some different experience? And I thought that the nearest thing to politics was reporting politics and analysing politics and bringing politics to people through the television. And so I went to work for London Weekend Television as a current affairs researcher and then a producer. And I lasted for nearly 3 years, but it was only nearly 3 years because I wanted to get back into politics to help rebuild the Labour Party, which is what I did.
And how was working in television in the early 1980s? How would you imagine it differs from today?
Well, the fundamentals were the same. What you're doing to me now is very much what we did to politicians in the early 1980s. But there were possibly more people employed. There was more money around in television. It was a bit of a gravy train. And I think they've cut back a wee bit since then, as everyone's had to, watching their costs and making sure they can compete properly. But it was much the same. I think one thing I do feel about television then, though, was that they spent more time, more programs about sort of serious things. For example, the program that I ended up working on was called Weekend World, and it was a really serious, analytical, current affairs program. It would take a subject and devote an hour to it, half an hour of analysing it with people interviewed and graphics and things explained about world situations or crime or unemployment or whatever. And then the interviewer would put somebody into the hot seat at the end and just put all the program and its analysis to that politician, really tricky, difficult interviewing. And, you know, it was serious and it did challenge you. And now I feel sometimes that the people who make television think that the viewers aren't intelligent enough to follow all that for an hour, that it's got to be more like light entertainment than serious analysis. And I think that underestimates the viewer. I think it rather devalues serious issues and, you know, political, you know, affairs and things which people are interested in, and they do want to see them properly analysed. They don't just want current affairs programmes turned into bun fights and clever dick interviewers, you know, interrogating people just really for the sake of hearing their own voices rather than getting, you know, proper answers. It's as if the television programmes are now behaving like tabloid newspapers and playing everything for headlines and for circulation. And you know, that has its place, but I think also sober, serious, you know, treatment of issues also has its place without going for the headlines, without, you know, interviewing people in order to make them seem silly or inarticulate.
Yeah.
Just getting their views and finding out in a rather more penetrating way than many programs do now, really what makes them tick, why they've taken the decisions they have, what the choices were that they had, and why they've gone for one course of action rather than another. And I think that takes a bit of time. It takes setting up in, you know, in the program, the compilation that precedes an interview, and then giving a lot of time for the interview without, as I say, turning everything into a sort of scrum. You know, as if the interviewer's got to beat the politician and, you know, show off, really.
So this is all very, very good information for all of the young YCTV program makers here. This is how it should be done. This is how you should do it. So, returning from television to politics, did television really help you be able to put the boot up Labour and get them back into action again?
Well, it got me my job.
Really? Going from television got
Yes,
you the job?
it got me my job because Neil Kinnock became leader of the Labour Party and he wanted to shake things up and reorganise everything at the party headquarters, and he wanted to find some, you know, brilliant young TV
so you
guy
were just there, fresh
you know,
out of television, able to speak the talk.
to take on this job of Director of Campaigns and Communications, and then they landed up with me.
So, as Director of Campaigns and Communications, you were in charge of, you reintroduced the Red Rose and you came up, coined the phrase New Labour. You also introduced Tony Blair. Now, when did you first meet Tony Blair?
I've never been asked that question before.
Really?
Where did I first meet Tony Blair?
Come on, it must have been a really interesting meeting.
I first met Tony Blair in 1986, and he was number 4 in the shadowed Treasury team.
Okay.
He was pretty junior.
Very.
Pretty junior.
Wow.
And we needed somebody to go on breakfast television, you know, to attack the government or make some point or other. And I remember thinking, that guy's good. I've seen him, you know, a bit on the television, and he's pretty smart, and he puts the party's case across very well, and, you know, he thinks about what he's saying, and people just find him easy to listen to, and he's pretty persuasive. And so I got him to go on a morning breakfast TV programme for an interview. He did very well indeed, but he did upset the other 3 members of the Treasury team who were above him, who wondered why he'd gone on and not them. And I had a pretty nasty encounter, I remember, with one of them later on in the day.
And where is that gentleman now?
She was a woman,
There's me,
and
sexist
you know,
man.
and she didn't really prosper, and she lost her seat at the next election, and I don't know where she is now.
So, do you believe that if John Smith hadn't died, he would be the Prime Minister right now?
No, I'm sure he would have been, yes. Because the party's case was very strong. We had really got our act together. We'd become a, you know, strong, united party, and people were, you know, really fed to the back teeth with the Conservatives. They wanted to change, and I think they wanted the policies and the values that we were able to put forward to turn to. What they didn't want was all the baggage and the disunity and the scraping around that the Labour Party went in for, and all the bad mouthing that the party had, revelled in years before. They didn't want that.
No.
They didn't want a party that lived in the past. They didn't want a party that was offering policies that they'd grown out of. They wanted a party that was looking forwards, that was relevant to them and spoke to them like a sort of modern adult party.